Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning, David, and welcome to podcast number 8.
Number 8, unbelievable.
I know, 2 months already. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's time flies when you're in a busy real estate market like we are right now. So
yes.
It's amazing how fast the weeks go by.
Absolutely, and there's lots happening. The government just introduced a new stress test, which went into effect as of yesterday. So normally what happens?
Hot off the presses, David. Give us the lowdown on that.
Oh my God, yeah, it is hot off the press, and our market was going really crazy, and the government, always tries to implement measures that slow everything down just a little bit. So this was another one of those attempts, and the effects are yet to be seen what it will do. However, if you're qualifying for a mortgage, the government basically makes sure that you can afford to pay. The previous stress test was 4.79%, and now it's just over 5%. So what that really translates to is your borrowing power, it has been reduced by roughly 4 to 4.5%. So if you qualified for $1 million prior to June 1st, now you're going to be qualifying for about $960,000 of a mortgage. And what the government is doing is they're really making sure that if interest rates go up, that the buyers are still able to service that debt, service the mortgage without any issues whatsoever, and they have ample amount of breathing space based on their earnings to carry that mortgage.
Right, that's a great explanation, because that's the issue when rates are as low as they are, and even though there'll still be pressure, I think, in the foreseeable future to keep the rates relatively low. Like, we're not going to get up to 8 or 10% or anything like that, because that's just going to hammer too many people. So the government's got pressure to keep the rates low, but they realize that over the next, if people are getting a mortgage now and they might be a 3-year term or something, and when they go to renew, it could creep up by a point or two by that time. And can those people still afford to live in their own homes? And so that's why they've implemented the stress test. Now, you tell me, David, does this have the effect of stopping people from going into the market that were thinking of going in, or do people just change what they're going to look for? So if they were looking to buy a house for $1 million, and now they can only get one for $960, so they're going to look to buy a different house in the $960 range that's affordable, but there's still a transaction. There's still going to be activity.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this will impact first-time home buyers the most, right? Which is not something you want. You really want to encourage home ownership. That's what North America, that's what Canada has really been built on, the pinnacle, that home ownership is for everybody, right? So any policies that the government comes up with that really deter first-time home buyers from entering the market are I'm against personally, and I think I caution that we go down this path. But unfortunately, first-time home buyers, because they're leveraged always to the most, they were buying at 95%, right? For them, that qualification is really, really important. So now they're qualifying for more and for less, and prices are continuing to increase. They're getting priced out of the market, right? They have to look for smaller units. They have to look further outside of the city, and it's just unfortunate, really.
Yeah, and the government's doing two things at the same time. There's still a land transfer tax rebate available to first-time home buyers, which is designed specifically to encourage them and help them get into the market. So they've got that policy on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're saying, well, yeah, we want you to buy something, but we're going to put some handcuffs on you and prevent you from buying maybe what you want to buy and being competitive out there. So you got to buy something lesser. And that might mean they just have to they have to change their sites. That's where a good real estate agent comes in too, to say, look, here's the stuff that you can afford now. Let's do that. If it's 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, you might have to make another move to get into what you would have liked to get into now, but at least still get in the market. It's still a good idea to get in the market, right?
100%. And what we're seeing a lot right now is joint venture partnerships. And we're seeing it a lot in the new home category as well. So, roommates or friends or younger professionals will actually buy a property together and leverage their earning power to be able to afford more, right? And
Right.
Again, I always look at real estate as a stepping stone, right? So don't think about your dream home from day one. Think about what steps you have to take in order to get into your dream home. And that might require, buying a smaller condo and building some equity and paying down your mortgage, selling it and buying a little bit of a bigger condo and paying off your equity and paying off your mortgage and stepping up to the property that you eventually want to own. And again, having the right guidance along the way, making sure that you're buying a property that has future appreciation potential is really crucial when you're making those decisions.
Right. So
But you mentioned the rebate for first-time home buyers for land transfer tax, and that rebate's been around for a really long time, and buyers get a full rebate on the first 400,000. I personally would like to see that amount increased, right? Back in the day, you could buy anything in the GTA for almost 400,000. Bungalows were 400,000. Townhouses were 400,000. You could buy any condominium on the market for up to 400,000. That's not the case anymore. So it'd be great if the government took a look at that first-time home buyer incentive for land transfer tax and really raise that price point to give especially first-time home buyers that have never owned real estate anywhere in the world before, a little bit more of a relief.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, which is why, let me know when you're running for office, because I'll be campaigning for you for sure. I think it's a great idea, and the thresholds just haven't been adjusted as they should be. Like there isn't much on the market for 400,000 at all. You can't even get a small condo for that. When they put that in there, you can get a decent sized house at the time for $400,000. So they haven't adjusted those thresholds at all, and they really should.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago where you're talking about people getting into their first home, not a condo, and they were in the $500,000 to $700,000 range. Now, like those days are gone. Like under $1 million, it's hard to find a semi right now.
Yeah.
Right in the GTA.
I think I bought my first house in 2009, and it was a beautiful bungalow in a 60 by 130 foot lot in south west Oakville, and I paid $324,000 from it. Right. And that house today is worth $1.2 million. That same house, right? So when I bought that house as a first-time home buyer, I got the full credit of the land transfer tax rebate, right? Now, if a first-time home buyer bought that house, they would only receive 1/3 the benefit that I received, which seems grossly unfair.
No, it is. Do you remember the interest rate you paid at the time on your mortgage?
That's a good question. I think it was in the 4s.
Yeah.
Or in the 4%.
Well, this is a story that, some people will listen to. It just shows how old I am. But the first house that I bought, the interest rates were in the 20s at the time, in the low 20s. So and I bought from a builder. So how builders have incentives, different things. You could get some appliances sometimes. The market was a little bit cooler. There was more incentives. At one point, big deal to get a plasma TV if you bought from a builder and things like that. So they've always had certain incentives. But back when we bought our first property, the incentive that they offered was that the builder bought down your interest rate. So they'd set it up with TD Bank, and instead of paying 22%, your rate was 14 3/4. Wow. So this was a bargain at 14 3/4% for a 3-year term. That's what interest rates were at the time. And I remember 3 years later, when my mortgage came due, the real interest rates had dropped to 12%. So I went from 14 and 3/8 or 7/8, something like that, down to 12% on a renewal. And I thought that was like unbelievable. I get to stay in the same house and we're paying only 12% now. What a bargain.
Oh my God.
Imagine someone today, paying 12% on a mortgage. So I don't think we're going to see the rates get up to those type of levels at all. But the value of the stress test is to, when it does creep up and it goes up a point or two, we don't want people on renewal to get killed. Like if I went from 14 up to 17, I probably couldn't have afforded my house back then, right? So at least, the trend was in the other direction. So the stress tests have some value, but yeah, I hope it doesn't discourage, especially the first-time home buyers. I hope they just get proper advice from the real estate agent, reset their goals, and look at something that will be affordable to them and protect them in case there is an increase in interest rates.
Right. And the new stress test doesn't really necessarily affect people who are already in the market, just because it's very rare that, if you've been in the market for longer than 2 or 3 years, that you have no equity in your home, right? So as long as you have some equity in your home and you're changing from one home to the other, then, the stress test really wouldn't be affecting you as long as you're making a horizontal move and you're already in the market. It's
Right.
more in those first-time home buyers who are really leveraging and who really need that affordability where the stress test is impacting them the most.
Right.
Right. And when we talk about history of CMHC, the Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation, kind of, the products that they brought to the table and the insurable mortgages, I mean, we're very fortunate to be able to get into the market at 5%, right? Because the rest of the world, a lot of the times you need 20%, you need 15%, right? And those numbers are a lot harder to attain. You have to save for a really, really long time, and you don't get the benefit of all the profit centers you get from real estate, especially leverage, if you're not in the market. So as you're saving and the market's running away from you, it's that much harder to save 20% and jump in. So in order to encourage home ownership and make it affordable for everybody, I believe in the 70s, the government came out with the Canada Housing Mortgage Corporation, which guarantees the mortgages for the central banks. So if you're buying a house that's less than 20% down, the A-level lenders have zero risk, absolutely zero risk on you defaulting on the mortgage, zero. The government fully backs and guarantees that loan, right? And that gives investors confidence. That gives the banks confidence to lend on these mortgage products that they normally wouldn't have in their portfolio because they would consider them too risky, right? So it's really interesting to see how stable our housing market is and how the system works. And I know we've talked about in the past that, TREB is doing an outreach, global outreach, and teaching other countries, how we do it, how we structure our system, how MLS works, and it all combines to really make it the system that we have and enjoy on an everyday basis.
Yeah, no, it's really quite a system, and it does allow people to get into the market where in other jurisdictions they can't do it. And all CMHC is really asking buyers in exchange for that is set your sights on affordable properties. Okay, we're allowing you to do it with 5%, but you've got to be able to carry that at least. So you can't always get what you want. Someone should put that into a song. I think you can't always get what you want. But you have to reset your sights, and there's a lot of product out there and a lot of places people could be happy to buy that's more affordable. And if it means you're going to make one more move during your lifetime than maybe you thought you might when you're planning it out, then so be it. And you've got to just do the stepping stone and get from the small condo to the bigger condo to the semi or the townhouse and then into a detached home if that's your goal. So you may have to do it in a few steps as opposed to making a bigger jump at one time. So great that we've got that backing, that government backing for that. So we got to, we criticize the government for a lot of things. And this is a program that's lasted through, it doesn't matter if it's liberal government, conservative government, it's, CMHC has been around for a long time and nobody's wanted to to abolish it or get rid of it. So it's working. It's certainly helping us in the GTA. And, but every once in a while, they've got to implement something else like this stress test just to keep people in line properly.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it does affect first-time home buyers, which is again, one of those really important market segments that historically we've always encouraged to really get into the market. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that we're making sure that the mortgages that are being written can be fulfilled and carried and paid, even if the environment that we're in changes a little bit. I mean, I think it's a good margin to have.
Yeah. Well, and that's the hot topic of the day. I know we did want to talk about some other things today. I think in particular you wanted to discuss a little bit about when you're negotiating agreement purchase. So when do you have a deal? When do you actually have acceptance, and what goes into that process?
Yeah, I mean, the market is still really busy, still a very busy seller's market. But again, we are seeing with the stay-at-home order and everything that's happening in our marketplace today, we are seeing the market drop off just slightly from the height that it was. And in the market dropping off just slightly and cooling off just a little bit, we are starting to see that buyers are experiencing a change of heart in some of these offers that are being negotiated, right? So really wanted to talk to you today, David, and really get an understanding of when is an offer firm, what does irrevocability mean on an offer, and pitfalls that agents submitting these offers should really be aware of, as well as the clients.
Yeah, and that's important. And it goes back to basic, simple principles. An agreement of purchase and sale for real estate, first of all, it has to be in writing. Okay. A verbal contract is not enforceable for real estate. So the law starts with that, which is why we have these written agreements of purchase and sale and why they're so important. So then the question is, when does that agreement become binding? Because our system, it's at one point in time, this is also pre-COVID, sometimes you get the buyer and the seller in the same room across a table with their agents, and they're negotiating back and forth and they're signing in the same place at the same time. That doesn't happen very often. So the system is more like, one side or the other is making an offer. Usually it's the buyer that makes an offer at a certain price, whatever terms they want, whatever chattels and fixtures they want included, whatever conditions they want to put in. And then they submit that to the seller. So they give the seller a period of time for them to decide whether or not they're going to accept that. So that's what we call the irrevocable period. So I'm putting an offer in today. I'm saying today's Wednesday. I'm saying it's irrevocable till Thursday at midnight, let's say. So I'm giving them a day. Sometimes you only give them a couple hours, but the date and the time of the irrevocable period is stated right in there. So during that irrevocable period, the buyer can't change their mind. It's out there and it's open for the seller to accept. So the buyer, it's gone out of their hands. If the seller accepts it word for word, signs it properly, initials things properly, word for word, then it's a binding agreement. If the seller changes one thing, they like all the terms, but they want to change the purchase price or the closing date, or cross out a chandelier that they wanted included. If they change one thing and initial it, it now becomes a seller's offer back to the buyer. Okay. And now the buyer is basically off the hook if the seller changes anything, because it's not the buyer's offer. Now it becomes a seller's offer, and the seller has to make it irrevocable back to the buyer for a period of time and on those terms and conditions. And now the seller can't change their mind once they present that back to the buyer. And now the buyer can accept it exactly like it is, as long as they do it by that time deadline. And again, if the buyer changes anything, again, it flips over, becomes a buyer's offer with a new irrevocable time.
I
right?
always explain it to people like a tennis match, right? Is the ball in your court? Can you hit it? Right?
Right, right,
Um, and that's really, really important to understand. A lot of the questions we're getting from realtors outside of our brokerage that don't have a really good understanding of how this works is, what, my buyer changed their mind, right? The offer is conditional. We changed our mind. You know what? Even though the offer is still not expired, we want to withdraw the offer.
right, right. And they can't do that. And sometimes the buyer, might say they want to withdraw. They can't do that. And sometimes the seller's coming back. They've got 24 hours, and the seller through their agent might say, "Well, we're considering your offer, but we probably want to change a couple things, a couple of the chattels we want to change. We want to change the closing date. So we're contemplating that." And they sort of verbally go back to the buyer and say, or the buyer's agent say, "Would you be prepared to do that?" And sometimes, the buyer says, "No, we wouldn't accept that." So therefore they think the deal is off, but no, the deal's not off. That's just a verbal tennis match at that point, going back and forth. None of that is binding. So the seller can still choose to accept that offer as it was until that deadline. So sometimes they're trying to see if they can, put out some feelers and see if they can negotiate something better, but in their back pocket, they've still got that offer that's fully acceptable, that could be fully acceptable to them if they so choose. And the buyer can't change their position. So that's pretty critical. And a lot of times, the agents don't realize that. And certainly the buyers and sellers don't realize that because they think the verbal communication is part of the deal.
Right. Right. And there's a lot of strategy with irrevocable dates and times, right? And if you're a buyer and you're submitting an offer, how much time you give the seller to make a decision
Right.
is also critical in the negotiation aspect of it, right? You don't want to give them half an hour to accept an offer. It is a big decision, but if you give them 24 hours and you leave that offer open out there for 24 hours, you do run the chance that another offer comes in within that 24-hour period.
Right.
And now that original buyer would be in a multiple offer situation where they would be competing with another offer that came in for the same property. So there is a lot of strategy in irrevocable dates. And you do want to use them to your advantage when you are negotiating. And it depends on which side you're negotiating, right? Because that strategy changes. If you're the seller, then you want the longest irrevocable time because you want other people to see the house and you want to give everybody a chance to come in with an offer, right? If
Right.
you're a buyer, you want the seller to be making that decision, as soon as possible to prevent multiple offers from happening, right? So understanding how that tennis match is played time-wise is also very important.
Right. And that's where it's critical to have an agent that understands and knows how to play that game of tennis properly to guide you through it. At my end, we get it, we hear about this when there's a mess and something wasn't dealt with properly, or they didn't, they tried to change their mind after the irrevocable time period expired, or they signed it back after that period and they made changes. And then is it still a valid offer? And another problem that we come across with some agents and deals is they think, okay, once the agreement is signed, normally it says a deposit's going to be paid. It almost always says a deposit will be paid, but a lot of times it says it's upon acceptance. It has to be delivered right then, but oftentimes it's within 24 hours of acceptance. And some people mistakenly believe that gives them a carte blanche makes it a conditional offer. Like our offer doesn't go firm until we deliver that deposit, which is 24 hours later. So we've got that 24 hours as a cooling off period or as a conditional period. We can get out of the deal, right? And I see you're nodding, David, because you know the answer. Like that's not true. You've already got a binding agreement of purchase and sale if it's already signed properly, and that's the delivery of that deposit check is just the first condition, so to speak, that has to be completed, in this case by the buyer. Like both parties have to do certain things during the course of the transaction until you get to completion. So just the first element happens to be the delivery of that deposit. But if the deposit's not delivered within the 24 hours, that doesn't make the agreement null and void. It just makes the buyer in breach of the agreement. Okay, they're in default of the agreement, and there's remedies that the seller could then take.
So, so David, I know that one of the technical necessities for an offer to be binding is for there to be consideration, right? And then the court doesn't really look at the amount of consideration, whether it's $1 or $100,000. They just want consideration to be exchanged for a binding offer.
Right.
But I know that when it comes to an agreement of purchase and sale for the transfer of real estate, there's a concept that is signed under seal.
Right.
Right. And every single time you see a signature pad, you do see that little seal printed right on the agreement.
Yeah.
What does that mean? How does that change a signature under seal versus a regular signature?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, but your explanation of it in the first part is really the answer to it. It's consideration. So going back in the history of the development of the law of contracts, having something signed under seal. Once it was under seal, that seal itself was considered to be consideration flowing to the other side, because it's sealing the intent of the party signing it to fulfill that contract. So they've brought that into an agreement of purchase and sale. So if you sign the document under seal, that seal is considered to be an element of consideration. It's a promise that you're going to fulfill that contract, and you're not going to sell. If it's a seller, it's a promise you're not going to sell the property to somebody else, that you're intending to complete that contract. So just signing something under seal is deemed to be giving some consideration. Now, there's other forms of consideration. So a lot of people think, well, there's no consideration until a deposit is given, until there's some money that's actually handed over, but that's not really the case. The consideration is deemed to be signing a document under seal. Okay, and this goes way back to the days when there was actually wax seals done. So someone could sign a document, and then you sign a document under seal. The one under seal is the enforceable document in law. The signing a document without a seal sometimes would be considered more like a letter of intent, like I intend to sign something binding, or I'm still negotiating to sign something binding, but it's not done. But once you seal it, it's I intend to be bound by this agreement. So now, we don't go through the archaic process of putting wax seals on things. So we're just signing something and stating that we're signing it under seal, and we've got that little red sticker built right into the agreement of purchase and sale. So once that's signed, under seal, there's a valid enforceable contract that if you don't fulfill your side of the bargain, the other side can take you to court and sue you on it. So that's really where that comes from.
Yeah, and you know what, David, it's really entrenched in common law, right? Throughout history, and it's a big deal. If you are affixing your signature onto anything, it's that much more serious when that little seal is beside your signature, and it does have, proper consequences as well in law. So
and the same thing holds true with electronic signatures. Okay, it's the same thing. You're making a statement basically, because the document states that you're signing it under seal, and you've got these seals there. So most time, we don't think about it. I'm sure even you as an agent, you wouldn't be having that specific discussion with the client. Oh, by the way, you're signing this under seal, so it's binding. You're just telling them you're signing the agreement purchase and sale, so it is binding, right? So you should have an expectation that once you sign it, you have an obligation to complete the agreement, and you don't have the right to back out. We've talked about that in previous podcasts. There is no cooling off period. Okay, an irrevocable period is not a cooling off period. It's out there. You've passed the ball to the other side of the net, and even if you didn't like the shot you made, you can't take it back and hit a different shot.
Up over the net, you're there, and whatever comes back at you, you're taking it.
Right. It whatever comes back, you have to accept. Right. You can't say, "Oh, I didn't mean to hit it that high or that low. I meant to hit it somewhere else." There's no do-over. It's out there, and it's up to the other side to accept it or not accept it. Okay. And then once they make any change, the positions switch, and now it's irrevocable by the other side, and now the ball's on your court. Right.
100%.
I love using the sports metaphors and that.
Well, you know what, I always said to my clients, as your agent, it's my job, you know, because we've been dealing with multiple offers, you know, for as long as I had my license. I remember 14 years ago when I first got my license, my first client that I had, she was looking for a condo. I'll never forget it. $250,000 in Toronto. And I remember every single property that I showed her, we were in a multiple offer situation, right? So, I mean, you learn how to deal with multiple offers very quickly. Otherwise, you know, you're just spinning your wheels and you're not putting deals together, right? But my goal as an agent was to always put the ball in my client's court, so they had the decision making and saying, yes, I want it, or no, I don't want it. So they know exactly where they stand, what price they need to pay, you know, how their offer fares with the other offer. It was always my goal to get a sign back from the seller, so we knew exactly, you know, what we needed to do to pull the trigger and move forward. And that in itself is a really, really important strategy when dealing with multiple offers. You want to give your buyer as much information, and ultimately that ability to, you know, say, yes, I want to take it at this price, or you know what, I'm not comfortable, let somebody else have it, right?
Right. Right. And it's that's what gives you leverage and gives you control. And it's no different in our practice. We're involved in negotiating agreements, sometimes on residential as well. But on commercial transactions, same principle holds true. We're always pushing the other side. Strategically, we want that sign back, okay? Because then we've got the ball in our court. And a lot of times there is some verbal jousting back and forth, but we know that, you know, and sometimes you need that before you get the sign back, but you still have to be pushing to get that sign back, because none of that verbal jousting is binding on anybody. It's got to be reduced to writing. So until you have something in writing, you don't have something that you can accept. So when you get that sign back to you, now the ball's in your court. And, you know, even if you'd like to go back and change it, you also know that you can accept it exactly as it is. And you have that explanation with your client, and you can explain to them, you can take it as it is. If we do change anything and go back and try another round, that we lose that control, we lose that leverage, we're throwing it back to them. So we can't make that change, throw it to them and they say no, and then say, okay, well, we'll take that previous deal that you offered. That's already gone, right? So the strategy is really important. So it's important you've got the right guidance from real estate agent, from a real estate lawyer, in getting through these processes.
Yeah, and it's really important for the agents as well to really understand the legal principles surrounding, you know, the communication, the acceptance of offers, and how that works. Otherwise, you know, they can't really strategize and give the right advice to their clients. And you know, there's a lot of nuances to really pay attention to. You know, how much irrevocable time do you give? How do you position that conversation? How do you protect the best interests of your client using time to your benefit?
Right.
The
And
other question, sorry, David, the other question we always get, and this is one that we see quite a bit, is if an offer is signed under seal and it's irrevocable, let's say until 11 p.m. the next day, but it's a conditional offer, so there's conditions in it, right? And the buyer changes their mind. Now we know that, you know, the offer is not firm, you know, it is irrevocable, right? It is signed under seal, but it's a conditional offer. And the buyer, after making that offer, before the seller accepts, calls the listing agent and says, listen, you know what, I changed my mind. How does that situation differ a little bit from a firm offer?
not really. Like, you have to know where it's going to go. Okay. Now you don't have a firm offer on the table because it hasn't been accepted. But if you're on the seller's side, you've already been given notice with a buyer that they're likely to change their mind. And if there are a bunch of conditions in there, so they know that even if they accept the offer, the buyer's likely to use one of those conditions to try and get out of the offer. Sometimes you as a seller just have to decide to cut bait and move on.
Right.
Okay. You could stand on your legal principles and say, no, you know, we might still accept this offer. And then you've got to go through the condition process, and you better be acting with, you know, bona fide, in good faith when you go through the conditions. And if you have an inspection condition or fines, you can't just, the next day say, oh, we're not waiving the condition. You've got to go through a good faith process, right? And that's your right as a seller, but you as the advisor to the seller, sometimes you got to look at it and say, look, they're going to look for a way out. We don't want to get in litigation here. There's other people that could buy the property, and maybe it's just time to cut bait and move on, right? So you got to be smart about it and not just stand on your legal principles. You got to understand the law, understand your rights, but you've got to be practical and find a strategy that's going to help sell the property. And you want to sell the property and not buy a lawsuit, right? That's the principle that you really want to stand on if you're being a good agent and a good lawyer. It's the same thing at our end. We're telling the clients the same thing.
Right. So if the offer that was being presented was firm and unconditional, then the seller's rights are very different because, again, the ball's in their court. If they choose to accept, it's signed under seal. And the buyer doesn't want to go through with the transaction any further. Now they're in breach of contract with no way.
Right. Now, and if the buyer has given a deposit, then the seller's within the rights to keep that deposit, not give it back to them if they want out. If the buyer hadn't delivered the deposit yet, but they already had a firm agreement under seal, it's still a binding contract. The first element was, okay, they're supposed to deliver a deposit. Now they don't. That doesn't allow them to get out of the deal. That means they're in breach of the contract. So now the seller can say, hey, you're in breach of the contract. The seller has a right to sue them. Seller has a right to say, okay, you're telling us you're not going ahead, so we'll sell to somebody else, but we're still reserving our rights to sue you. Because even though we don't have a deposit here to get, we can still get a judgment against you. So if we sell to somebody else, because you tied up our property for 24 hours or 48 hours, and maybe we lost an opportunity to sell to somebody at that price, if we sell for a lesser price and suffer damages, we still have the right to go back and sue that defaulting buyer that didn't make the deposit. Now, whether they do or they don't, time will tell, depends what they sell for and what damages they really suffered, etc. But that's the basic legal principle and premise. So they have that right. So buyer can't just walk away clean. Okay. There is going to be something hanging over their head, and who knows? Because you never know. If the market's great today, the market can stop at any time, as we know, right? It could slow down at any time, and all of a sudden there could be a price reduction when it's resold to somebody else.
Right. And then there would be damages and the buyer would be liable, and talked in previous podcasts what those remedies would be. And again, our goal is to put these deals together and avoid litigation at all costs, but that doesn't, preclude the fact that both buyer and seller have to act in good faith when submitting these offers and negotiating these offers, and when dealing with irrevocability, right? I mean, it is a big deal. And the most important thing is, when you're submitting a firm offer and it's signed under seal, no matter what happens, there are consequences to submitting that offer. And, being the buyer's agent and being the buyer, I strongly, strongly urge you guys to be 1000% sure before submitting that offer, because if the seller chooses, again, you're putting that seller in the seller's court, that ball in the seller's court. And if they choose to hit it or play with it, you will be held liable if you don't perform and you breach that agreement.
Right. And and I like the way you always bring things back to tennis and ping pong. Anything with a net in between is sort of where you come from. And a lot of it, from you and I discussing it and even talking about it in our last podcast, it goes back to where we learned certain principles and the guidance and mentorship that we received at some point in time, and how critical that is, and how we sometimes, without thinking about it, we keep drawing back to things that we were taught by other people that came ahead of us, whether it was coaching us in sports or other mentors in our businesses or previous businesses, things that we've, and how important that is. And I know you've had some really strong mentors that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. And, David, I was very fortunate when I first got my real estate license. I started working for a really small boutique office in Toronto. And the office was owned by a second generation broker owner, and his dad passed him the business, and he worked, as an agent under the guidance of his dad since he was 18 years old. And this particular broker owner is a huge property owner. I think he owns 46 like apartment buildings, not condos, but apartment buildings in downtown Toronto. So I was very fortunate when I first received my license. He actually lost his driver license, and I became his personal driver. And I was with them 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. And I was like a sponge. I mean, I saw how he talked to his tenants, how he talked to his staff, how he talked to his buyers. I went on all his appointments, listing presentations, buyer presentations. So I really got a first-hand look at how he conducts himself, how he runs his business. And that 8 months I spent with him at the beginning probably gave me a 10-year head start in real estate. So he was absolutely instrumental in sort of teaching me the ropes and giving me that head start in real estate. And when the opportunity presented itself to buy into Sutton Summit and become part of the management team, I didn't hesitate, because in my viewpoint, that was my way of giving back to the realtors here at Sutton Summit Realty, right? What was given to me and all the opportunities that were given to me. And in fact, we structured our new realtor training based on the mentorship program that I received when I first started in real estate, because it was absolutely crucial, and it catapulted me to the level of success very quickly in my first year. I mean, I think I did like something like 17 transactions in my first year of real estate, which is, amazing in any sort of books, right? But we follow exactly the same principles of mentorship that I received when I first got my license. And we hire a lot of new realtors, and a lot of our new realtors do really, really well just because we followed that success path that I was so fortunate to have gotten when I first got my real estate license.
Well, it's fabulous. And it's amazing how no matter how many years go by, you draw back on things that happened to you way back, right? And I look at it that way too. We talked in previous podcasts about some of the coaching we had and how in sports and the team building and so to me, some of my greatest mentors were some of the coaches I had, and not every coach, but I've got, a couple basketball coaches I had in high school were two of the greatest guys around, and that just knew how to get the best out of everybody and how to build teams and stuff that I kept drawing on. Took basketball principles to when I coached my kids in hockey, used the same principles of team building and things like that, used the same things, drawing it all the time in our office, in our hiring practices, in the climate and atmosphere we try and create around our office. It goes back to that. I think personally, probably my greatest mentor, one of my greatest mentors was my dad. And I wanted to show you this. This is my dad's hat that he wore to every Leaf game.
Oh, very cool.
So this is one thing I inherited from him. He used to wear it this way because he'd get away with it. My wife insisted I wear it this way, but I wear it to games. And my dad was a season ticket holder with the Leafs from around 1970. We still have season tickets in the family name. Now it's distributed about, 3 generations later. There's a lot of people that want to go to games, so it gets spread out. But I love to go to games, huge Leaf fan. But he was a great businessman in menswear. Nothing to do with what I did. I didn't follow him into menswear, but I used to work there. And he was probably the greatest salesman I've ever seen. And he could, he happened to sell menswear, suits and jackets and, stuff like that. It could have been real estate. If he'd have gone in real estate, he would have been one of the top real estate agents, no doubt. He could sell anything. And some of his greatest principles was you got to know your product and you really got to get to know your client. And I would watch him in his store come in, and people would come in and they're looking for a blue suit or something, and they're going through and he's got a million blue suits, and they're just looking at each sleeve, and they're moving the next sleeve over, and my dad would go and say, I want you to try it on, try it on, see if it fits. And no, it's okay, I'm just looking. And my dad would break him down and say, what do you mean just looking? Did you come in to buy a sleeve or did you come in to buy a suit? And you can pull it off and make the guy put it on. And when he put it on, he looks at me and it's either going to fit him or not fit him. It's either going to look good or not good, but it looks way better than it did on the rack once it's on his back, right? And once you've got it on his back, he always knew he was going to get a sale. It might not be that suit, but he's going to sell him something. He's going to find the right suit for him. So the same principle applies in real estate. If you're an agent, you're just showing them listings and showing them numbers and one picture of the house, they don't get a proper feel for it. You got to get them into the house, whether into the real house to walk around or a virtual house during COVID. You got to get them inside to get a feel, right?
Yeah, and you want that emotional connection. That's
right. You need that emotional connection.
I always say to everybody, listen, if you can play on somebody's emotions, price goes out the window, right? If they just like the house, price becomes an issue.
Right?
And you want to find them that one house that they absolutely have to have at any price, right? And they're emotionally attached, they're invested, and that's the house for them, right? Versus if you show them a house, yeah, it's okay. At the right price, I can buy it. Yeah, this one's okay too. At the right price, I can buy it. That's not the customer you want to have if you're a listing agent. You want to have the customer that's completely persuaded and emotionally attached, and they're willing to have it at any price. And that's really, where a good agent and the right marketing and staging and making sure the house is presentable and, all those little things that can get fixed and you have that customer, right?
Right. And it goes to those two principles. You got to know your product.
100%.
You have to know what you're showing your clients. You're not showing them the wrong thing for their lifestyle and for what all their top 10 needs are, right? And you have to know the product and you have to know your client at the same time. So you have to understand it from both viewpoints and understand what they want and then go find them the appropriate thing. Don't show them a bunch of garbage. Don't show them a bunch of suits that are the wrong fit for them, the wrong cut. It's the same thing. Don't show them the wrong house. Don't take them to present offers on properties when they have no chance of getting it. They're just going to feel that disappointment in a competitive market right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And listen, a good salesperson also has a responsibility to uphold the trust of the client, right? So don't sell the client something they don't need.
Right.
And that goes in any sales profession, right? Like when you're the best at what you do, you can sell people certain things, right? So, but you have to hold their trust in high regard as well.
Right. And that's, a key element in our practice. That's why we've talked in previous podcasts. We're never selling price. Like it's just not part of what lawyers should be doing, and there's too many out there that are selling price. Oh, we'll close your deal. Here's our bargain basement fees for doing it. Like if in my opinion and my partner Jonathan's opinion, if we're doing that, then we're losing the game. We're not being professional, but we're not providing proper service. It's not about price. It's about getting the job done. It's getting what the clients really want, which is to close the transaction and get it done when it's a difficult transaction or something comes up last minute. And as much as we all think we've seen everything and every closing, oh, this is going to be a routine closing. And why, can you give me a deal on this? Nothing's routine. It's amazing. Things come up all the time. Right. So yeah, price, no one wants to overpay. So we make sure we're competitive, but providing legal services should never be about the price. It's got to be fair. You got to get something, you got to get consideration, you got to get something in return, you got to get the right result, you got to have proper service and the right team behind you. So we focus on that.
Yeah, I left my first brokerage because they were a discount brokerage, right? And as much as I learned from my first mentor, I also learned, what I didn't want to do is, have quantity over quality, right? That is one of those internal standards that and paths I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to do what he was doing, where, he was, basically a discount brokerage and, dealing with hundreds of clients a month. I wanted to go the other route. I wanted to go more exclusive. I recognize that, our service and the advice and the consulting that we provide was first and foremost and the most important. And I said to myself, you know what? I don't want to undersell myself. I want to charge, a fair commission, but I want to be able to give my clients over and above the service that they expect. And that's really the industry that we're in. We're in the service industry.
Right.
We're here to service our clients. And my argument is, like, you cannot do a good job of servicing your clients if you don't get remunerated correctly. Right? You can't go the extra mile. Like I teach new realtors all the time. I say, look, if you get remunerated correctly, right, and there's an issue after the property has closed, and I'll give you a small example. For example, a garage door opener doesn't work, right? Your clients just bought this house. They just got the keys. They're super excited. They walk up to the house. They punch in the garage door opener. They hit enter. The garage door doesn't open.
Right.
Now imagine the emotional feeling. They just spent an absorbent amount of money. A lot of people, this is the biggest investment of their life. They walk up and their first interaction with the new property that they bought, the garage door isn't working. Now you as the buyer agent can absolutely call up the seller's lawyer or the seller's agent and complain and write emails and go through the whole process. And it's going to take a couple of days to get a response. And, if the other side responds in a timely manner, you get an appointment, you get a service truck, but all this takes time, right? Or you can reach into your phone, pull up a garage door open company, get a service guy out there for $150, $180, $200, and get the issue resolved the same day in a matter of 2 hours. What's a better customer service situation for your buyer client? Right? What are they going to remember more? Right? So if you're remunerated correctly, right, you can service your client over and above their expectations, right? And this is a strong message to all the realtors out there. Don't compete on price, compete on value and on service, because that's really what's going to differentiate yourself. Anybody can lower their commission. Anybody. A monkey can lower their commission, right? Not everybody can go the extra mile and really service the client, really go out of their way, right, to make that home buying or selling experience that much more magical, right? It should be magical. Like, clients are paying you an absorbent amount of money, right? It should not be routine. There should be an experience for your clients. And you can't make it an experience if you don't charge the correct amount, right? Because you don't want to deal with 50 clients at a time. You'd rather deal with 5, right? But really, be involved in that process and make it special for them.
And be involved in the whole process. And if you're getting paid properly, you don't have the attitude, well, I discounted this one. I don't want to put the time in. I don't want to stage it. I don't want to answer the call. I want to move on to the next one. All I want to do is sell it, right? For whatever I get and move on. It just changes your whole attitude. So I agree with you 100%. I'm always telling the same thing to agents, like don't get your full commission. Don't be a discount agent. That it's not, if that's the way you're only getting clients because you're offering those type of perks, then you're not doing something right. Even as a young agent, okay, you've got to hold your ground. And sometimes we have agents saying, okay, I agreed to pay for my client's legal fees, or I agreed to pay for their inspection. It's smaller stuff, but still, like, avoid it if you can. Like, that's not the reason why they should be retaining. They shouldn't be choosing you because you're going to pay for their legal fees for closing it. Like, that shouldn't be the deciding factor. So if you accept that it's not good for you as an agent, then you should also be doing the same thing with the other network that you're putting together for your clients. When you're talking with their home inspector and their broker and their lawyer, like, you shouldn't be running around on their behalf trying to retain the cheapest one or asking for discounts from those people. as well. You've got to respect that they've got to earn a proper amount, and you want the best people that are going to provide the best service, whether it's the lawyer, the home inspector, the brokers. So don't go around asking them to discount it too. For my client, can you take off a couple of dollars of your legal fees to, help me out here so I get, that should never be the deciding factor. It should be, you go to your client and say, I got you the best lawyer that's going to protect you, the best law firm that's going to protect you and make sure it closes.
The best moments, right? I got you. Right. And
right.
Those
people pay a fair price. Pay a fair price, right?
100%. And all those people are in the service industry, right? And you want to make sure that your client,